Welcome to Sky Talkers. Here are your hosts, Charlotte and Caitlin.
Hello and welcome to Sky Talkers. I'm your host, Charlotte.
Hey everyone, I'm your other host, Caitlin, and welcome to this week's episode where we're talking all about the season finale of The Acolyte, episode 8, titled The Acolyte. And this episode aired July 16th. It was directed by Hanelle Culpepper and written by Jason McAuliffe. This was such a good finale. I was so shocked throughout it, and I'm really excited to be talking about it today. I just feel like there's so much to cover. There's so much potential for a season 2. I love this show.
Same. I feel like this finale was really satisfying to me personally, but also gave me a taste for season 2. We need season 2. Oh,
Yeah.
We need season 2. # renew the Acolyte. Like we need it. I'm really hopeful that at D23 there's an announcement or something which is in a couple weeks in California.
D23, that would be so great. I was like, we might not hear anything until Celebration next year.
D23. I'm holding up for D23.
No, I'm with you. I forgot about D23. Yes, give me the announcement. I want them already filming. I want it already being written.
The 2-year break between television shows, these types, we've already discussed this. It's just not okay. Like we need to get on it. Okay.
And if they announce it at D23, then that means hopefully they could start filming next year.
Yeah, like January.
Yeah, I'm like, Leslie can write for the next 4 months, and then they'll start filming in January, and then they'll have something, a little teaser to show us something at Celebration next April. I can do this schedule. I could be a producer.
Waterfall schedule like John Favreau.
Yes, I could do it. Put me in.
You're
coach.
Already doing it. Yeah.
I agree with you. I think you and I talked so much this season about how Leslie had discussed that there was going to be an ending. It was going to end, right? And in a way that could be satisfying whether or not they got a season 2. And that felt like such a question mark, I feel like. And we talked a lot about what could be a satisfying ending, but still leave it open-ended for a season 2. And I really think that they did that kind of perfectly.
Yeah, I Agree. However, I will be extremely disappointed if we don't get a follow-up to this story. As I think this closed it out, there's a lot of things that I'm like, okay, that really set me up.
Mm-hmm.
I have an idea of where we're going to go again with this, and I need it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's not okay if they don't give me another season of The Acolyte. But I think from Leslie's perspective, if she wasn't going to get another season, I think that it makes sense where they left it.
Agreed. Okay, so before we dive into talking about the entire episode, we need to talk about how next week we're going to try something new. Usually after we finish covering a show, we'll do a Q&A episode sometimes where we go through questions that people send us, and it sort of ties up any loose ends that we didn't cover episode to episode. We're still doing that, but this time we're going to do a call-in voicemail situation. So, I know. So we've set up a number. We have a number. And actually, it's a fun number. Caitlin and I deliberated about the number.
We talked a long time about the phone number.
So if you have a question about the Acolyte in this past season, or you want to just share some feelings about how much you love the show, or something that we didn't cover and we need to discuss, please call us at, and I'll have this in the show description too, 774-343-1138.
Doesn't it have such a nice flow? I love it.
And we just threw in that 1138 in there, and I'm just really happy. Okay.
Yes. So please send us a voicemail. This is the first time we're doing this. It's pretty exciting. It has actually been a minute since we've done a full Q&A episode. So I think this will be really fun, and I'm excited to hear everyone's thoughts or questions about the Acolyte. You could even drop your favorite fanfic recommendation about the Acolyte, about Osha and Qimir in your voicemail. Whatever you want, we would love to hear it. So again, that number is 774-343-1138. And if you could please leave a voicemail by Monday, July 22nd at midnight, that's kind of going to be our cutoff. Unfortunately, this number is just for US-based listeners, which we're sorry about. But international listeners, please feel free to email us at hello@skytalkers.com. And you can submit a question that way, and we'll read it out on the show just like we have in the past.
Yes. So, okay. Without further ado, let's get into discussing this episode. Okay. This episode is called The Acolyte. How do we feel about that? Okay, because we didn't have an episode title on premiere night. And then the next morning, it was dropped The Acolyte.
I don't know.
I'm not a fan. I'm coming out
either.
here to say, don't love this title. I think it makes sense. Of course it makes sense for the story. Okay. Of course.
The in front of it, we've broken pattern.
The naming conventions.
Leslie was so close to the finish line, and then we lost it. I thought it was so funny because in our Discord, our Patreon Discord, everyone was talking about the episode, and then every once in a while someone would put in a comment of, has there been a title yet? Has there been a title yet? And then everyone would be like, no, I guess not. And then the conversation would continue. And then an hour or so later, someone else would be like, what about now?
Exactly. And then this was the reveal.
I know it. I don't like it.
Again, makes sense for the story.
It does.
Of course.
Now,
because I think it does solidify that Osha is the Acolyte. Not that wasn't clear in the narrative, but at the same time, if this episode was entitled, I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of other ways that this could have gone, and the naming convention is not there anymore.
Well, I think that, these one-word titles that we've had throughout the season, we were really able to attribute the title to a lot of different characters and kind of speculate on what it meant for different characters, especially comparing May and Osha. And it just doesn't feel like that for this one. It feels just for Osha, which on the one hand is great. Now she's fully the Acolyte. It's fully her story, I guess, moving forward. But I don't know. It definitely deviated in a way I didn't expect. And that's all we can say about it, really.
Yeah. Okay. So something I thought was super cool is we started this episode off with Osha's breathing. So we clearly knew that she was within the Cortosis helmet, having her sensory deprivation force situation.
Her moment,
only what you take with you. And I think it was really great that Qimir slowly approaches her and is like, wow, she's wearing my helmet.
he smirks, chuckles. He's like, oh, I see.
There she goes.
Put it on.
My helmet. Yeah, exactly. But things obviously like quickly turn bad as she's having a premonition that I think this whole thing was really interesting that Leslie would introduce premonitions, I guess, at the 11th hour. I think this whole thing is interesting because if we want to compare it to, say, Empire Strikes Back or Revenge of the Sith, when obviously the immediate connection for me was the concept of a premonition for Anakin Skywalker in Revenge of the Sith when he dreams about Padme dying. And things are different there's two premonitions, right? One before, one with Obi-Wan Kenobi and one without. I feel like what's interesting is both of those premonitions essentially came true, but like in a different way than he foresaw them. And then same with Luke's in the cave in Empire Strikes Back when he encounters Darth Vader. Obviously, Luke doesn't chop off Vader's head and see himself within it. But at the same time, like that premonition does come true. So what Osha sees, I interpreted it as, so she says, it was May. She had her hand outstretched. She was killing Soul. She had a saber in her hand, but she didn't use it. Qimir says, this is the future you saw. She can't, and he's astounded and says she can kill with no weapon. And I think it's interesting that perhaps she views, this is how I interpreted it, that she like can't see that was actually herself, not May. How did you interpret that?
I thought this whole scene was really interesting. I have to say, I kept focusing on a lot of Chimir's expressions. I think he had some really interesting expressions throughout this episode that I found difficult to interpret sometimes. And this was kind of one of those scenes where when he turns away from Osha, when he says she can kill with no weapon, and then Osha comes back, saying the future isn't fixed, I can still stop her. And the way he kind of pauses, and I don't know, you can kind of see him calculating in his head in a way. And I wondered if he sensed that it was probably Osha who was seeing herself in the vision instead of the other way around. That was kind of how I interpreted this scene. I think as far as Osha actually having the premonition about what happens with Soul, I think it makes sense that it would be her, because the whole point about it is her reconnecting to the Force herself, and that's what the sensory deprivation chamber does of the cortosis helmet. So of course it would show her something about herself. But Osha is she could never imagine a future where she would actually be the one to kill Soul. So of course she interprets it as May. But of course the Force, the cortosis helmet, is actually showing her the truth about herself, that it will be her who actually kills Soul. And I think that part of me wondered if Qimir knew that, or knew perhaps that the helmet only shows you things about yourself in some way. I just found their interaction here, one, that he was so worried about her in the beginning. I was like, oh, he's he's gotten himself in trouble, I think.
Well, sometimes Qimir is just so soft. It's like, it's very interesting.
It's really interesting. And I think that I was really interested to see that we got this back and forth between him in the void place where his eyes aren't black, and then it would switch to him actually trying to get the helmet off of Osha in the cave. And I thought this was really cool because he's in the same kind of setting that we saw Torben in. But Osha, for a second, I wondered if Osha would appear to him in that space the same way that Anastasia appeared to Torben a few weeks ago. But I realized that Osha has never really tapped into that power before. So, and she's not trying to take over Qimir in the way that Anastasia was taking over Torben. And I think it also kind of speaks to Osha's power, that her intent was not even to possess Qimir, but it still happened anyway. And I think there's a lot of hints at just how powerful Osha is. I'll also say how powerful Qimir is to have broken through that semi-possession.
Right. Okay. So you interpreted it completely different than I did.
Mm-hmm.
I did not think that Qimir was possessed by Osha at all. I thought he was entering the helmet to help her get it off.
Oh, see, I thought when he went, so my interpretation is when he noticed that when she starts breathing heavier, and he realizes something is wrong, he runs up to go take the helmet off, and then he can't because her power is coming out. And that's like when he gets pushed like down to his knees, there's like a force field around her, and he becomes he gets taken into the vision, into the power too. Like the power is emanating off of her and he gets pulled into it.
See, I just thought it was he was trying to help her.
He went into it willingly.
Yeah.
I think he was trying to help her. I don't think he realized he was going to get taken into the void, basically, for lack of a better word.
For me, I really did think that this was a confirmation that Qimir knows some of the dark magic and things like that Mother Anastasia and the witches also use. So it was like a sort of hint at the future of potentially Qimir and Osha training together and using this, I guess, Sith magic or witch magic or something like that in terms of the possession.
I think he does know about it, but I don't think May was ever able to use it.
Interesting.
That's just pure speculation. I think he does know about it because May has probably talked to him about it. But I don't think, I kind of think that the power was creating like a barrier around Osha. And then he got pulled into it when he tried to take the helmet off of her, but he didn't know that that was going to happen.
I think it sort of does confirm, though, that the cortosis helmet and that void that Torben was in that we saw are sort of the same. It's that part of the Force that is extra. It's like a different version of the world between worlds or something, like accessing this different reality, this different form.
This different plane.
This different plane. It's like the astral plane, okay?
Yeah, I know it is.
But I hesitate. I shouldn't have said world between worlds because I feel like, but I should have. It's fine. It's fine. I feel like that opens up a big can of worms when you bring that in.
I know. You said that. I was like, oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. I feel like I feel like it is just a different astral plane, a different form of consciousness. And I think that's sort of similar to accessing the world between worlds. I mean, I think even with Ahsoka in the water in the Ahsoka series, I think that is a sensory deprivation situation that she went into too. It's sort of similar, but it's also very different.
Well, the thing about the world between worlds, I think kind of our big takeaway when we're discussing these other astral planes is that when Dave was creating it or talking about it, he discussed it. I always remember he said this thing about, are the characters actually there?
Yeah.
And he said, it doesn't really matter. It's where they believe they are.
Yeah.
And I think that that is kind of true for all of these types of places, like this void. Is Qimir actually there? It doesn't. I think the answer is no, because we see them going back and forth between the real cave and then the void, just like we did with Torben. But the point is he believes him there. But then the other point is that a character like Qimir is powerful enough that he knows that he's in this void right now. Whereas I don't think Torben really understood that. And he was also so much younger, right? But I think Qimir understands that, and that's how he's able to start to break through.
Mm-hmm.
And also the fact that Osha, this is like her first time kind of accessing this power, it feels like.
Yeah.
So then they have the conversation about how, Qimir is saying, you're stuck here. You don't have a ship. And Osha banters back, well, you don't know where you're going. So looks like we're going together. I think Qimir actually says we'll go together. But then we get to the next scene where we come back to Sol and May, and we find out that they've arrived on Brenock. And I would like to say we did call this, that they would go back. I had speculated last week that they would go.
You specifically called it.
Yeah. That they would go back to Brenock or the unknown planet. And it totally makes sense that they would come back to Brenock. And we find that May is still tied up on the table on the bed there. And this whole episode is really, for Sol, it's really just him losing it more and more, I would say. And it is really kind of heartbreaking to see, but you understand why it's happening and how we eventually get to the end where Osha kills Sol. But here, May is really trying to get him to say more about justifying the murder. At the same time, she's using Pip to free herself. And she says, prove, like, what were you trying to prove? That murdering our mother was justified? And Sol says, what happened to you and your coven was an accident. And she says, accident? Then why did you lie to Osha? Why did you blame it on me? And he really is just becoming more and more unhinged. He says his only regret is not saving them. But he never talks about all the other stuff that surrounded that. And I think this is something we'll kind of come back to in that final confrontation between Osha and Sol. He says, my biggest regret is that I wasn't able to save you. And he starts to tell May about the truth about her and Osha not being twins, of being one consciousness. But May, you put in our notes, May pips him, which
I decided to make Pip a verb.
I love that. That's so funny. May pips him. And then she runs to the escape pod and she says, see you in hell, Jedi, which was...
I knew this was going to trigger some people, and I'm so happy it did, because it is so funny that it's not only in Empire Strikes Back iconically by Han Solo, but it's also by freaking Beru in or it's not Beru, it's Owen in the original Star Wars. Like, saying hell in Star Wars, like, there should be more of it, TBH.
It was so funny. I love it. It was like a great mic drop moment. I loved that sequence. But it, like, the ship, I think we kind of talked about this in episode 6. But the ship becomes very eerie. It almost has a hauntedness to it, and with this back and forth between May and Sol, and that really kind of continues, especially for Sol once they're back on Brenock in the fortress.
I would say everywhere Sol goes, it's sort of like there's an air of the past. There is this guilt. There's this burden. I think he suddenly, since the last episode, and perhaps the one before it as well, like you said, with the lights being out in the ship and things like that, there is just this haunted feel. I think this man is haunted. However, just like you said, there's a sense of spiraling, I think, that is happening. You did say he said that his only regret, I just want to correct, he didn't say his only regret. He said his biggest regret I wasn't able to save you both. And I don't think that is wrong. I think his biggest regret probably should have been accidentally killing their mother. But I do sort of feel like the biggest revelation from this scene for me is that throughout the years, Sol has developed this thesis that he felt justified in everything that the Jedi did on Brenock all those years ago because of the fact that May and Osha were these special types of people, which he says they're not even twins, they're not even sisters, and he gets cut off, obviously. It's fascinating to me because that's the through line here, that Sol thinks that because they're special in the Force, they're not really individuals, and I feel like it sort of strips away their humanity, and instead it has become something for Sol to protect and obsess over versus really understand like what each of their motivations are and what their wants and desires are in life. I think this is complicated later when Sol is explaining that he wanted her to live her dreams of being a Jedi.
To Osha.
To Osha, yes. To Osha right before he dies. But at the same time, I do think there's a sense of we're going back to the fact that, okay, so why were the Jedi so interested? They thought the witches were a scary force cult that they need rescuing. Then also on top of it, there's this need for like bodies, I guess, to show proof of the fact that they're these force created beings, not even twins, something super unnatural. And I just feel like there's a removal of the humanity of these two people from this conversation. And I think that's probably like the biggest issue. And that's why it's pretty satisfying by the end when May asks Osha what she wants, and there's a choice there. And we'll get to that later. But I think removing that choice is the biggest sin here in a lot of ways, or is one of the biggest sins. Now I'm just like conflating what all the issues here, but
Well, I think this is what Sol has had to tell himself over all these years as well, because he can't admit that he actually loves Osha, which is something we'll also talk about later on. But if we go back to last week when we see the flashback, Sol obviously comments that the fact that they have the same symbionts, very powerful, it's important, whatever. But that was, to me, I never really read that as his motive in all of this. His motive, it wasn't about them being emergence, being this unnatural thing. It was, for him, it was about Osha and about, feeling that she didn't want to be there, wanted something different, that, and creating this narrative that her mothers were going to hurt her, which of course the truth is that Osha did want to leave, but the other truth is that her mothers were not hurting her. So that's where the complication lies. But like I said, to me, I never read that Sol's priority was number one, figure out the Force Virgins thing. That was like 3 or 4 on the list. He was using that as his justification for even going back into the fortress at the end when everything goes down, and using Torben as the reason, really, when Indara and Kalnaka see him go after Torben in that moment when they leave the camp, they all know why he's going there. He's not going there for the Virgins situation. He's going there because he's created this reality for himself where Osha is in trouble and May's also in trouble, but it's really about Osha. And that is now what he's told himself all these years, to kind of hide away from those realer emotions of guilt and love and regret, I think.
Yeah, I agree. You said it more concisely than I could about how the fact that they're not twins or something else in the Force did not feel originally like his original motivation. So it sort of caught me off guard and made me think, okay, so he is adding this to a list of guilt or like he thinks about this as a way out of his own guilt.
Yeah. After that, we have a pretty cool asteroid fight or asteroid
It's
chase.
so cool.
It was really cool. For a second, I had almost wondered if this was debris from the hyperspace explosion before I realized that it's like a ring around the planet or the moon, wherever they are specifically. But you did hear a lot of the reason I thought that is because I felt like I heard a lot of glass like sounds in the sound mix. But then I also realized that the ships have windows, which are some type of space glass. So
to me, this asteroid fight and space battle felt really fresh.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we haven't seen this type of environment in live action before. I mean, we've gotten an asteroid space battle, but this one felt a little different, brighter, really cool, just overall really cool. And some of the shots even reminded me of some groundbreaking effects that we saw in the movie Gravity. I think they had like a camera attached to one of the ships at one point that made it like spin a little bit. It was really cool. I really liked the way this was shot.
I think they explained the chase then became another metaphor for the power dynamic really well, of May being trapped in the in-between, basically between the two rings of asteroid. And she even says that his ship is too big to go down there. Like he won't fit between the two rings essentially. But then we see his ship again obsessively in an unhinged way, like breaking down through the layers to try and get to her. And I think the whole time you're wondering, what is he going to do? What is the plan here, Soul? Is he trying to destroy her? Which brought me back to Soul's choice last week too, and how I think I had said that when he makes the choice between May and Osha, that there's also this darker part of him that knows that May saw what he did to Anastasia. So if he got rid of her, he wouldn't have to worry about that anymore. And when they're having this chase and his ship keeps getting closer and closer to hers, like on top of her and like crushing her, that's also what I was thinking too, especially because at this point he seems a lot more like he's spiraling a lot more here
I think this is also confirmed, this thought that he is spiraling, by Basil. I was a little confused throughout the entire episode by Basil's motivations, but upon second watch, it's very clear to me that Basil is making sure that things don't spiral out of control, given the fact that he witnessed Soul turn off the communications, he witnessed Soul tie May down. I think he was sensing something is off here, and I have to figure this out. So him basically cutting the cables and making sure that he's not able to, I guess, crash the ship into May. I think that was a good move by Basil. He really held the restraints, I guess.
I could have never imagined Basil having such a long role.
I did not expect this character to be in so many episodes and also survive.
I know, me too. I wasn't Mog at the end. It's like, oh, Basil.
Yeah, I know. Mog. Oh my God, Mog. Mog is another character. I'm like, he's here again. Okay. I kind of love him though.
I love Mog. I love him so much.
The name Mog also.
It's perfect for him.
It's like Yord.
Could not have thought of a better name for Mog than Mog.
He's so Mog, you know?
And there's a little bit of Mog in all of us. I would say I have a good chunk of Mog.
30% Mog.
30% Mog.
Oh my God.
So next we do go to Coruscant, where we do see Mog again. So this was a good transition. And we have this incredible conversation between Vernestra and Senator Raincourt, right? Is that his name?
Sure. Raincourt? Raincourt?
It's something like that. And
I was trying to extract some meaning from the name, but I really can't. Like it looks like raincourt, like raincoat or something in a court. Makes sense to me in terms of like legal law, Senate. Like, all right.
It sounds very regal.
Yeah.
I
really liked him, by the way.
Oh, I loved
him. His actor was so great. And of course, like, if I'm on the side of the Jedi, I don't like him, but I really enjoyed this conversation because I really think it underscored the issues with the Jedi and the fact that other people are noticing.
Yeah, absolutely. When him and Vernestra are having a conversation about the murder investigation, and Vernestra says, I have the authority to do what I want, basically, if it's an internal problem. And she lets slip that there are multiple Jedi victims. And the senator is like, multiple victims, not just the one. Like, I feel like that was kind of a mistake on her part to let that slip. But he says this really great kind of statement about the Jedi. He says, I think the Jedi are a massive system of unchecked power posing as a religion, a delusional cult that claims to control the uncontrollable. Vernestra says, we don't control the Force. And he says, not the Force, your emotions. You project an image of goodness and restraint, but it's only a matter of time before one of you snaps. When and if that happens, who will be strong enough to stop them? And it's kind of incredible because this is basically how it's true, the Jedi are this massive system of unchecked power, and they are controlling how everyone is using the Force. And like we've referenced a couple times this season, Leslie has said that the show is about power and who gets to use it. And we're seeing all of these parties and entities vying for control and power, really the Jedi and the Senate. And then we had the Jedi basically having the same feelings about the Force cult that the senator is having about the Jedi. And then you have a character like Qimir, who we could say is like at the bottom of the totem pole. He's not, as far as we know, he's not in this larger organization like the Force Witches or the Jedi. And he says he just wants freedom to be who he is and to use his power the way he wants to. And then everything kind of snowballs up from there to the Jedi. And I really loved how the senator discussed that it's the emotions that are uncontrollable, not the Force. Because as we've seen time and time again, this is what gets the Jedi into trouble, is when their emotions do go unchecked and they don't have the tools to work through them in a way that is actually meaningful. And I think we can look at the entirety of the Jedi and say, okay, there are thousands of Jedi, and it feels like a lot of them are probably getting good advice sometimes about how to work through these things. But obviously, that's not an interesting story. So, our stories in Star Wars are about people who need to figure out their emotions. And the Jedi are often characters that fill this story need. And him talking about this, about your emotions being uncontrollable, juxtaposed with a character like Soul, is really kind of incredible. And then even juxtaposed with Vernestra, she has this image of goodness and restraint. And she even her snap, I would say, has been kept concealed in the way that she will end up taking this idea of blaming Soul for everything that happens. And then also whatever happened with Qimir, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. He's spot on, and it just adds to this nuanced view of the Jedi and how they are operating in this time period in conjunction with the Senate.
I think when we talk about power and the concept of power, and we conflate power with the Force, with the witches and everything like that, I think what the senator is doing here is underlying that the power at play and the power who gets to use it is not necessarily the Force. It's your emotions. It's love. And the fact that the Jedi shoved this down is a problem. And it's what took over Soul by the end. And we hear that when he's not even able to get out the line that he loved Osha. I think it's so interesting to me. I think about this a lot, how Anakin Skywalker never says, and Padme, they never say I love you to each other. It's very not once. And I think it's on purpose. And this is how I've sort of justified that in the last couple of years, or the last decade or so of being a huge Star Wars fan who loves Anakin and Padme, in that I feel like there is this real like arrested development when it comes to emotions and figuring out your emotions. And I love that the senator here is calling that out.
Yeah, I do too. And even the fact that the power the power and how it's being used, the Senate also wants control of that power too. They want to have the ultimate control.
Mhm.
And the Jedi running around with their powers unchecked puts them at risk as well. It's
Yeah.
just it's a great call out and uh really great conversation. I hope we see this senator back in season 2, which
Yeah.
we will also be getting.
Just to call out, I really I really liked the control room set. It felt very retro and colorful. I liked it.
Mhm. Yeah, I did too. People in our Discord were talking about the establishing shots on Coruscant that we've seen throughout the season so far, and how whenever we come to Coruscant, we usually have that establishing shot of the Jedi Temple, but in this time, as like centered, really. But when we came into this scene, we have this tower that's now in the foreground, and the Jedi Temple is in the back, and how we could kind of read into some of the metaphors about, the control room tower. I think this is a Jedi space that we're in anyway, but that there is a power dynamic that is shifting here. And now the Senate is playing a larger role in what's going on. I also
Totally.
think the senator has the most sarcastic "May the Force be with you" ever. And it lives next to "See you in hell, Jedi" in this episode for me.
It's so good. It's like basically saying the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I think also this established to me Vernestra's whole motivation in that she really feels like she has something to prove that she has control over. Her entire role in the series is to prove that she can keep the Jedi and their power under control, even if it comes down to hiding some things. And that obviously she's able to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And she ends up doing what the senator talks about, of creating the story of pinning it all on Soul,
Yeah.
like we talked about last week. Our next scene is Osha and Qimir leaving the island, and this was also a weird, like, "Qimir, what are you doing, my guy?" He, asks Osha one last time, "Would you ever consider?" And what he means is being trained. And then she says, "No, I'm not my sister." And he says, "Last chance." And you're like, "Do you mean that?" No, you don't. And I just think his approach to Osha, and we'll talk about this more at the end too with Osha's choice, is so funny because he put so much effort into seducing her. And then in this week, he is just kind of following her around and is talking kind of these empty threats with her, where he's like, "What makes you think I'm a fair person?" We've seen how violent, how powerful he can be, but he's just following Osha around and, lets her drive, lets himself get muted in the ship. Um I just think it's really funny, honestly. And like I said, I think that Qimir has put himself into a bad position. I think their power dynamic will switch a lot in future stories with the two of them. And I feel like you kind of see that playing out about Chimir's approach to Osha. He's very calm and very subdued when it comes to her throughout this entire episode, which I think is part of his is the point, right, of letting her work through these emotions herself. And I have something else to say about that a little bit later, but I thought this whole scene was funny about him saying, "I'm not a fair person," but then does absolutely nothing about it to give himself the upper hand, seemingly.
Yeah.
And then
Friggin' Plagueis.
in the cave.
Like so casually. This is okay. I have so much to say. And none of it I feel like our listeners are going to resonate with. I feel like 'cause we have not read the Plagueis novels. All we've
don't
gleaned
know.
is what people have told us.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued though, I got to be honest.
All right,
Um,
so Charlotte, for new listeners, who is Plagueis? Who is the creep in the cave?
Okay, the creep in the cave is. This is funny. You're asking me this question, even though I just said haven't read the Plagueis book.
I know, I'm asking you it so I don't have to answer it.
Okay, great. So in Revenge of the Sith, a big point of the point really is Anakin turns to the dark side because he is trying to save his wife from quote unquote certain death. And Palpatine offers this story that's it's a metaphorical story, is always how I read it, about how the Sith have this unnatural ability to potentially save people from dying, from death. And it happened with a master and an apprentice. And the whole concept of the fact that Plagueis, this person, the Sith, was able to discover the path of creating life and saving people from dying. And Palpatine, the eventual emperor who's telling Anakin the story, we find out is the apprentice that Plagueis had.
Well, and
And
in
there,
Revenge of the Sith, it's really about the temptation that Palpatine is giving to Anakin.
yeah.
That sets up later that Palpatine actually has the knowledge to save someone from dying,
Mhm.
and that's part of Anakin's fall. But then
Or
in
just knows it's
Legend-
possible.
Yeah, exactly. And then in Legends, there is Darth Plagueis. There's a story all about Darth Plagueis
Mhm.
and his life and search for immortality. And as we've mentioned, we have not read it. So.
Well, the Sith are also complicated in the fact that there's this rule of two where only two can rule at the same time.
Mhm.
So Plagueis being here, first off, Plagueis being here while Qimir and Osha were here serving. Did he have some soup too? Did Qimir give him some soup? I don't.
I've seen such hilarious fan art already of it. Like we saw the fan art, right, of Osha watching Qimir in the lake, and now there's fan art of the creeper in the cave, Osha, and the little creatures all watching Qimir in the lake.
It's hilarious.
It's so funny.
It's so great, and I think that immediate thought is that Qimir is the apprentice to Plagueis, just because we've heard about Plagueis before and we've heard about his power, but I guess it doesn't have to be like that, except for the fact that Qimir was looking for a pupil, a student, an acolyte. So when we talk about the rule of two, this is complicated because now there's three.
Mhm.
And I guess there's some tragedy there because I feel like we know that eventually Plagueis trains Palpatine. So who is who lives and who dies in the Qimir Osha Plagueis triangle? It has to be one of Qimir and Osha. I also think that Plagueis being here does bring up the fact that we learned that Qimir is potentially super old and immortal. It really kind of confirms this like immortal vibe, this
I
power.
love it.
Yeah, I do too. And I also will say, I think Plagueis with his like creepy hand outstretched in the cave, it really was vampiric to me. And kind of brought me back to our conversations about the entire concept of immortality and just even the physicality of this cave. Really did lean on some of those monster romances, and just the fact there's another person there, fascinating.
I love the idea that Plagueis can be immortal but cannot be hot, but Qimir can be immortal and remain hot.
Well, I think he's a mun, so MUUN. So I feel we haven't seen his face. Like maybe he's young and spry as a mun. We don't know.
That's true. I think the thing too about the rule of two with the Sith is that there is always a master and apprentice, and then the apprentice we've seen in multiple Star Wars stories seeks to get their own apprentice who will then help them kill the master. So then they become the master, and there's always this power shift and who is ultimately the strongest. I will say that an interview did come out with Leslie Headland, and I don't have the actual link. So this is just a quote that's been going around that kind of talks about this rule of two and Plagueis showing up at the end. And it does kind of talk about the actual ending shot. But Leslie says, even though Osha and the stranger are standing there, sort of looking out at the sunset, ready to conquer the world, the tragedy is we know they don't. We know there can only be two. We know Plagueis is there. We know that those two are doomed in some way. So to me, it's a bittersweet tragedy, this foreboding ending. But that's because I know about the Sith lineage and all these other things. Whereas I think a different subset of the audience can be like, they're married. I fall into both camps. Not
So
gonna
do
lie.
I.
But in another interview, Leslie also said that, and I don't have the quote, so I'm paraphrasing here, but that they there are other ways for Osha and Qimir to exist without being Sith, so not being in that power of two. And I think you and I really like that concept of there being an alternate path of making a different choice away from the Sith, away from the Jedi, the fact that you do have personal choice in the galaxy. So there could be a world that they become something else. But then there also is the reality that perhaps they stay with the Sith, in which case not all three of those people are making it out. And we know that Plagueis is one of the people making it out. So
eventually to train Palpatine, unless Palpatine
Yeah.
is also he's not though, because that's his whole quest in, I was going to say immortal, but that's his whole quest in the entire Skywalker saga. So it feels, there's such a story potential here. I'm so ready for it.
Oh yeah.
I was excited to see Plagueis because I'm like, oh my God, there's something different here. There's something weird. I love the hint at dark side force exploration.
Oh yeah, so much. I mean, this is what we wanted with Osha even going to the dark side. So we're going to see it.
Okay, so now we switch over to Sol returning to Brenock. The scene starts with Vernestra talking with someone over a comm. And I'm just kind of like, who is she talking to? Because that feels weird. I think that we got a lot of connections we basically get a confirmation that Vernestra knows Qimir, and that perhaps at the end of the series, Vernestra says that Qimir, someone was a pupil of hers. I think that's really interesting. So it makes Vernestra and her need to cover this up doubly intriguing, because what is their past, and how did even Qimir and Vernestra fall out? I need to know. And the fact that Vernestra had this like sneaky, like, it's highly unusual for you to contact this and go about this means. I wonder who she was talking to. I suppose one route is that she could have been talking and trying to talk to Yoda, and that was the ending scene, but that was not how I interpreted that.
No, not at all. I think they would have I don't think we would have had Yoda if that's who she was talking to. This felt different, and it's like a secret communication channel to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both May and everything ending on Brenock, it's something that you talked about last time, about how the entire series could end on Brenock. We could come back home. Returning home is a hallmark of the hero's journey. It really is a hallmark of like adventure storytelling too. But I feel like we haven't spent enough time or talked about really at all on the podcast in a while the concept of the heroine's journey, which is like the feminine version of the hero's journey. The hero's journey, I still think, reigns supreme as the monomyth, but the heroine's journey is really interesting because even Rey in the sequel trilogy follows the heroine's journey beat for beat. And just looking at Maureen Murdoch's cycle of the heroine's journey, I feel like is similar to the hero's journey. Osha and May do follow this, particularly Osha. And I'll just spend like 3 minutes on this. When you look at this cycle, it starts off with the separation of the feminine. And I think that if you can think about chronologically Osha and May's life and the way that we experience their story, I know that it is fragmented in the Acolyte, but her entire life and even where May's memories leave off, it all starts with this accident that happens on Brenock. And I would say that is her separation from the feminine. It's her separation from her sister, her twin, her other half, her complete identical person in the Force.
Her literal other half.
Yes. So then after that, it's the identification with the masculine and the gathering of allies. The identification of the masculine is fully the Jedi and Sol, and she thinks that her allies are the Jedi at that point. So leaving with the Jedi is key here. The road of trials, meeting the ogres and dragons. I think this is when she is fighting the battle within herself to let go of whatever guilt and anger she feels towards May for not letting her dream come true and for their mother dying and everyone dying. Obviously, we find out later that was misplaced, but that is her struggle. And then also, obviously, her Jedi training. Finding the boon of success. I feel like, what do you think the boon of her success is, Caitlin, at this point?
I think it's kind of like a false success. Like I would almost kind of put it as her life as a mechanic.
And like
which is
leaving the
kind
Jedi by her own accord.
yeah, because the next stage is awakening to feelings of spiritual, I can't read it, andity and
Aridity.
aridity. Sorry, it was a little blurry on my screen. And death. And I think that this is kind of this finding the boon of success, the feelings of spiritual aridity and death, and then the next phase of initiation and descent to the goddess. This is really the beginning, the first like half of the Acolyte of the show, and this reconnection with the Jedi, but that's not
And also
finding
the
out.
Force, right?
Yeah, or realizing that she isn't connected to the Force, that death,
Mm-hmm.
and she's not there. And then initiation and descent to the goddess. To me, that's really like episode 6, and the seduction with Qimir and everything that could represent for her.
I would even say spiritual aridity semicolon death could be it made me think of that that vision that she had of young May in the
Mm-hmm.
crash
Yeah.
ship, which felt haunted in a way. Like even her crashing is sort of experiencing death in a way and coming back from that.
Yeah.
And so then the initiation and descent to the goddess, I think, is her rediscovering herself and also reconnecting with her sister when they cross paths again. And then we next have the urgent yearning to reconnect with the feminine. Again, the urgent yearning to reconnect with May, even though she doesn't want to, she knows that she has to. And they have to cross paths again. Just a reminder, the beginning of this journey is the separation of the feminine. And I think that was her separation from not only her sister, I guess, but also her past and her growing up in this witch-centered coven of women. Healing the mother-daughter split. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, given the fact that there was quite literally a mother-daughter split with the fact that the mother dies, and her realizing this is her healing in a lot of ways, her realizing the truth, her finding out that May didn't kill her mother, that Soul did, and that brings us to the next, healing the wounded masculine. She identifies the masculine and the allies originally as Soul and the Jedi, and there's a split there. She needed that part of herself to be healed, and by this point, when we heal the wounded masculine, then we find out the truth, and of course she kills Soul. And then the truth and that realization, and also sort of hearing his confession, I think is healing for her in this weird way. The way that this entire show is presented is fascinating, just given the fact that Osha's freedom, usually when we see the dark side and the dark side initiation, it seems like a removal of freedom of free will. It's a loss of self. But for this show, it's sort of this alternate view in that it really does feel fully like Osha's choice. When we talk about Anakin Skywalker, we think about the fact that it is his choice, and we do lead with that when we talk about it. But at the same time, we understand that there's all these different machinations at play that make that choice so tragic. For Osha, I don't feel that sense of tragedy in her choice. I feel the sense of tragedy in the fact that the masculine has let her down, that the Jedi have let her down, and that she has to separate from her sister again. But I do feel like by the end of this, I feel like she feels healed because she has the knowledge in order to move forward with her freedom. And so then the next is the integration of the masculine and feminine. I think by reuniting with May, that hug that they do at the Tree of Life, and also, like I said, this acceptance of her freedom and her own choice, and the fact that May even lets her have that choice. She apologizes. And so everything that started her own tragedy in the beginning is sort of reversed and apologetic. And then again, if we are in the cycle, the last cycle, we'd enter the cycle again. And hopefully that's season 2, this separation from the feminine. Again, this separation from her sister, her twin May, as May's memories get erased.
Yeah, I think the heroine's journey is really fun to kind of put with May and Osha because they are the same person. And they're also, we have the metaphor of the moons with them and the eclipse and the way that they're always waxing and waning towards and away from each other at the same time. It makes it just is fun to kind of flip these story structures a little bit. Even what you were saying about, the healing the wounded masculine, that comes for Osha through killing the masculine as representative of the Jedi and Soul here, and how there is this flip of her joining the dark side effectively is her freedom, when often in Star Wars it's not presented that way, for good reason. So it's great to kind of see this new perspective on it and what it will actually mean for Osha going forward into the next chapter, into this next partnership with Qimir, and kind of what we were saying earlier, that perhaps there is a new path forward for them, because to be on the dark side is to lose yourself, and to lose yourself in that power and in those emotions. And it's not good to solely exist within those emotions that the dark side is so well known for. So is there a way for Osha to descend into the darkness and be able to integrate both these halves of her, quite literally with May, but then also for herself, of these light side and dark side emotions by the end of her journey? I think that's where I would hope to see Osha at the end, at like when we're really done with her character, is this, that she's not on with the Jedi or with the Sith, that she has figured out how to exist and acknowledge, to accept her darkness, but to not be ruled by it either. And I think that the heroine's journey would take us there eventually. But in this cycle of it, we are ending in the darkness, on the dark side, and that is actually the good thing for Osha to reach this conclusion at this point.
Yeah, I think it should also be noted that May is still wearing Osha's clothing, and it's all white. It's dirty, but it's all white. And Osha is wearing a new gray outfit. It's not black, it's gray. And I think
Can I just say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is like my favorite hood
I've
ever seen in Star Wars.
It's so good
on Osha. It is like it's the perfect size. It's got great structure. It's not floppy and massive like the Jedi hoods are. And I love a Jedi hood. I love it so much. But this hood is so great.
Yeah, it's a good hood.
Sorry.
But I think it's interesting that her outfit isn't black. It's gray. And just to speak to integrating sort of this light, what she's learned from the light side, what she's learned from the dark side, I think what we see in May and Osha is a full representation of the yin and yang. Because a yin and yang isn't 50%, 50%. It's integration of both of these traits while one trait is sort of dominant. And so I think we talked about this a lot with Reylo and Ben Solo and Rey, but the thing is about their stories, we were always hoping for redemption for Ben Solo, and we were always sort of like, where does that leave this concept of the yin and yang? And I think we were hoping that there would be a sort of new Jedi Order that integrated emotions into it, or love or something. I don't know, in a controlled sense. That was the writer. It was up to the writers. Okay.
We didn't get a conclusion on what it meant to be a balanced person.
Correct. And I don't even know if I would even describe Osha as like fully balanced. And that's not really what I was at or after in this series. Because I think this series has always been pitched, I mentioned this, as a female dark side series. And that's where we ended. And I'm very happy with that. And it really sets us up for something really fun. But I think when we talk, Reylo is just different, just based off of the fact that we wanted redemption for Ben Solo, Han Solo, and Princess Leia's child. We really wanted that. And we wanted Rey to also be a part of that somehow. And I think what we're dealing with here is different than that yin and yang that we were getting at with Kylo Ren and Rey, which I think was more explored when Kylo was on the dark side. And May and Osha, I think, might continue to flip sides if we get season 2, if we get season 3. I don't really know, but I don't know. It's intriguing to think about how they embody potentially the yin and yang more so than other characters that we've seen.
Yeah, it's just really exciting to see a completely different perspective on the fall to the dark side. And I think that's what I was saying of, this is where Osha is supposed to be at this juncture. She is supposed to fall to the dark side. But in season 2 and season 3, if I can be so bold, where is her path leading at that point? Is it further down the dark path? Is it being consumed by these emotions and the dark side wholly? I think there's a real possibility that is where her path could end. But is there the possibility that it's something more nuanced than that. It's something, perhaps a version of what we maybe would have wanted to see with Rey and Kylo. Because where I'm at now, I'm like, I don't see May as a or as Osha as a character needing to be redeemed, even now that she is on the dark side. And how will that factor into our conversations in the future, depending where she goes? I'll be really excited to see, because so far when we look at characters like Anakin and Kylo, the conversation is always about redemption. And for Kylo, it was especially knowing that he was pulled to the light, that he was corrupted by this darkness. It was, eating away at him. There was a need for him to be redeemed, to show that redemption arc for him. But it's so different for Osha. So I'm really excited to see what her next stage could be and where it would go with her on the dark side.
Agreed. Okay, so next we have this epic lightsaber duel between Sol and Qimir. And I was, especially when they were in a hallway, I was really like, oh my God, this is so similar to Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting in Revenge of the Sith. The lightsaber fights are so good. And I just really liked the kung fu, crouching tiger, hidden dragon vibe of the way this was all staged, with the slow motion and everything, the like stomp kick situation. It was so cool.
This fight was everything. I thought this fight was so cool. I thought that, again, Lee Jung-jae just completely knocked it out of the park as Sol and Qimir was doing, and Manny Jacinto as Qimir. It just is wild to me that they were able to make this look as good as they did. There is so much. Leslie has talked a lot about the influence of like Asian stories and like fighting styles and things like that. And this particular sequence where they fly down from the walkway that you said reminded you of Revenge of the Sith, and they have like the stomp when he's stomping on Chimir's chest in the air, and this like slow-mo of them flying. Was so reminiscent to me of different Chinese, because I watch a lot of K-dramas and like Chinese dramas as well. And you see this type of fighting style in Chinese historical fantasy shows all the time. And it's always so cool. And I know that this is like an older style in like Chinese storytelling. I think it's called wuxia, which I'm not saying that correctly, but it's spelled Wuxia. And it's like it's a whole genre, not just fighting style, but storytelling genre. And this was something I immediately recognized as someone who has not as much familiarity, but has seen some in these types of stories. And I thought it was really cool to see them like flying, basically. And it really is to emphasize the moves and like the dynamic of what's going on in the fight. And I think you really see that because I think it's Sol who is like on top. He like pushes. Qimir is the one that goes down first. And so then in the shot, it's Sol over the stranger. And Sol does get the upper hand on the stranger by the end. And I thought that this fight in particular, I could really kind of hone in on the differences in their fighting style, especially having had the benefit of some of Manny's interviews about his fighting style and wanting the stranger's fighting style to be very frenetic and random in a lot of ways, and how that throws the Jedi off. But I think you can see that Sol has learned how to combat that here. But then Sol still has that very Jedi formality in the way that he fights the stranger, when he'll pause and, very kind of dramatically reignite his lightsaber. And it just feels so different from the stranger. There was a really great line that a really great exchange that they share here, where Sol says, "I will destroy you if I must." And Qimir says, "Not if she gets to you first." I love this line. Again, back to Chimir's feelings about Osha. He's been tracking with her this whole time of where her emotions are. And I think he's definitely talking about Osha here, not May. And one thing that I think we haven't really talked about yet is the fact that Qimir doesn't actually tell Osha about Sol's past, which I think he knows fully. He is letting her find it out for herself. And curiously enough, this really reminded me of Indara and Torben. Indara chooses not to give the answer to Torben and is frustrated when Sol just lays it out for him. And Qimir is doing the same thing here with Osha as his apprentice. And it's funny that Sol is
pushed back against that too.
Yeah,
originally
with Torben and with Osha as well. And I just I don't know. I just thought it was, when I heard this line, I was like, oh my God, Qimir is like Indara.
Yeah. I mean, they're both vying for control over mastery for Osha, and by in turn Osha's emotions and devotion. And so it makes the battle more interesting. At this point, I was thinking, how would I feel if Qimir killed Soul or Soul killed Qimir? I think I would be disappointed. I'm really glad it didn't happen. But when you watch these things for the first time, you're like, okay, how's this going to end? The stakes are real. No plot armor. What are we going to do? How would this be meaningful? How would it not be? And I'm really glad that we didn't get that. Instead, we got a way more epic fight later.
Yeah, totally. I think I was worried that Soul might kill Qimir.
Yeah.
I knew that we still had to get the confrontation between Soul and Osha, but I was a little worried for him at one point.
Totally.
But I shouldn't have been, because he's so cool.
Yeah. Okay, so then we get May and Osha rekindling in their childhood bedroom. And I think it was, let's just go through some of the quotes. We find out that Osha, the reason why she left the Jedi Order is, quote, because Soul tried to teach me that somebody I love can be capable of this level of destruction, and I failed. I could never learn to calm my emotions, my hatred of you, my grief over our mother. So I never became a Jedi. And I guess in the end, you got what you wanted. I don't think I could have ever thought that the reason why she left the Jedi Order on her own accord is because she couldn't let go of her past and her anger towards May. I don't know why I didn't imagine that. I do feel like this line delivery was a little clunky, and I was a little like, what just happened? It's a lot of information delivered right here.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, going through it again, whatever. And I think it's really interesting that that's the reason why she left. And it makes it tragic given the fact that that was all a lie. And then when May says, he's lied to you. How could he teach you to control your negative emotions? He's the reason you have them. You didn't fail. He did. And it's just this concept of destiny, right? That she tried to pull at her own thread and someone else pulled it for her. And this realization that there are all these, that she's been lied to for how many years about
16.
this? 16 years. And her life has taken twists and turns, and she was never able to realize her dream or reach her potential as a Jedi and leave on her own and do the Luke Skywalker thing of leaving Tatooine. She could never do that, and she could never let go of that. This realization, I think, is devastating.
Yeah, and we see her lash out immediately. She
Screaming.
Osha is so angry, and what I think is really cool is you see May react to this throughout the next couple of scenes and Osha's eventual full corruption, I would say, and how surprised she is at how angry Osha is. And this is something we've talked about with the difference between them, especially after May finds out that Osha is alive, that she really kind of her all of her emotions and need for revenge and anger was tied up in Osha. And it was like once that problem was solved for her, she let it all go and was able to move on. Whereas Osha has not been able to do that. And that is part of her fall to the dark side. And so we get to see that throughout this fight between May and Osha, of her straight up screaming feral, I would say, and really going at it with May. This fight between them, though, was so well done. I kind of can't get over how good it looks, considering it's the same actress. And I kept thinking about Amanda having to learn both sides of the fight. I thought it looked incredible. I thought they did such a great job with it. And you get to see throughout this fight too that they are mirror images of each other. Whereas you could see with Soul and Qimir that they have different fighting styles. May and Osha keep doing the same moves back and forth to each other. It's really cool, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And we have the coolest transition ever of kick to arms with with Qimir and Soul going back and forth between this fight. I loved that transition. I thought it was so fun.
It was very cool. And then we get the scene where Soul slices Chimir's lightsaber. And then, Qimir takes off his helmet, which I have to say, I also thought it was so funny. Qimir just walking around with his helmet before the fight, he doesn't have his bag like he did on Kofar in episode 4. So he just has to carry it around.
It's funny.
It's so funny to me that he just has it with him at all times.
He needs it, but he also doesn't want to wear it.
He doesn't travel with it on,
Yeah, totally.
But this move, this fabulous move of Soul slicing through the lightsaber, it really reminded me of the duel between Obi-Wan and Maul in Rebels. I didn't know if you noticed that, but they have a very similar kind of slash move. And at the time, in Rebels, there was a lot of commentary about this fight and how it was specifically choreographed to be slow. And if you don't know, this is when Obi-Wan kills Darth Maul in the show Star Wars Rebels. It's an incredible episode. But I remember the first time I saw it, I wasn't sure what had happened. And it's set up that way of, did Obi-Wan kill Maul? Did Maul injure Obi-Wan? What just happened? And you find out that Obi-Wan was able to kill Darth Maul in this moment. And in the commentary and the design of that episode, they talk about how Obi-Wan has honed his fighting style to Maul after all these years. And it ends up being the same kind of move that Darth Maul tried to use or did use to kill Qui-Gon in The Phantom Menace. And that Obi-Wan has learned from that. And that's how he's able to take down Maul in this moment. And to me, I was reading a lot of that similarity into this fight between Soul and Qimir, especially with that slash where he finally takes out the lightsaber, but also in the moment beforehand when they've got the two sabers crossed and they're both vying for power. And Soul knows now that if his lightsaber hits Chimir's helmet, it will short out and he'll lose. So it felt like he had learned in the same way that Obi-Wan had learned about Darth Maul. And again, when they had that moment of, the final moment of that fight, I was wondering, oh my gosh, like who got injured here? Did Soul just kill Qimir the way that Obi-Wan killed Maul in Rebels? That was my first thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The slicing of the lightsaber, I think. Yeah, I completely agree. I didn't make that connection, but is true. I feel like it was filmed in a very similar style.
So then we have the moment of Qimir removing his helmet to face his death with Soul, which I thought that was an interesting character choice of him to remove the helmet in this moment. And of course, Soul doesn't just go for the kill immediately, just like he didn't back on Kofar, because now Qimir is unarmed. His back was turned, all of these things, right? The rules that Soul is living by when he could have just taken out the person he's considered the big bad right then and there. But he doesn't. And it ends up being Soul's downfall because, like Qimir was telling Osha, I'm still the villain, whether or not I have my lightsaber pulled or not. And I've done all of these bad things, but you're gonna not kill me now because of these kind of ridiculous structures you've placed around battle and things like that. And this is what Soul does in this moment as well. And then May comes and fights Soul herself.
Yeah. I just want to push back about the fact that Soul doesn't kill Qimir. I don't think would have been I don't think that is the catalyst for his downfall. The fact that he hesitates, I think, is actually probably good given his rules, right? And if Soul had killed Qimir, I think it would have probably angered May and Osha, but they were already angry. And I think it's not like Qimir is the harbinger of the truth here. It really is May and then Soul eventually confessing. Qimir kind of like it gets removed from the equation during this conversation until the end, I guess.
Yeah, I think for the story, obviously it makes sense why Soul wouldn't have killed Qimir in this instance, but I think it does go back to what Qimir and Soul talked about in episode 5 and then subsequently about, because how many times has Qimir said this season, like, you would pull your weapon on me with my back turned? And the fact that he has the scar on his back and his weapon is gone.
Totally.
I think it's all in there. And and of course for the story, like you said, Qimir is kind of sidelined. Like the plot is now between May and Osha and Sol. So of course he didn't kill him.
Yeah. And I think just the fact that, May about 10 minutes before tells Osha about the truth, but the truth I think doesn't really sink fully in until Osha hears it from Sol. And then she does believe May in that moment and really begs him to stop talking when he just keeps talking. The fact that Sol continues to talk is sort of haunting to me, because he just keeps saying, I was protecting you, it was the right thing to do, and they would have sent you away. You were too old to train. They would have never had let you become a Jedi. I did what I thought was best of you. Of course, I wanted to tell you so many times, but I couldn't. I kept it from you because so you could have the life you always dreamed of. I did all this for you because I love. Like, that's a lot of text. That's a lot of words that were said, and way more than I think we usually hear. And it's sort of death confession. And the fact that in this moment, Osha uses the Force for the first time that we see to force choke Sol. This is the moment in which she uses the Force. Of course, it's going to be on the dark side. I don't know why we didn't theorize that if we were already theorizing that she's going to remain on the dark side, And it is haunting. I also think it's like sort of interesting and funny that we have been theorizing, like, as a fandom, and maybe not even on this podcast, how do you kill a Jedi without a weapon? That's so intriguing. And it ends up being Force choking.
The classic Force choke from a Darksider.
Right. Basically one of, if not the first
I think it is, yeah.
Force thing that we see in Star Wars and A New Hope with Darth Vader.
We're all dumb.
Yeah. So I feel like we should have saw that coming, but it's just, this is a classic example of like fandom overthinking things. And I think it's just interesting. It's, of course, like, this is the Force move that she uses is the deadliest.
It's so sad.
It really is so sad. Did you cry?
I cried. I started to tear up the third time I watched it. Because he, like you said, he really is just, he can't, the lid has been opened. He just can't stop talking. And it really is just, it's so heartbreaking. And even the fact that he, admits that he killed Anastasia, but he can't even say, I'm sorry I lied to you all this time. He can't even, in all those words, he can't even say that, because like we said, he has created this reality for himself that was justified and it's an avoidance mechanism to avoid these feelings. And it does make you wonder what would have happened if Osha had actually heard him say, because I love you, if that would have changed.
I don't think so. I don't think so, because it's just too late. That recognition of, because I think we heard it, so did she, but it's too late. He didn't recognize that emotion. He has no control over that. He has no understanding of that. He has justified so many things in the name of the Jedi and not sort of like in the name of love, I guess.
But that's what it ultimately was. It was a selfish,
but he was blinded by that.
Yeah, it was a selfish love for Osha and not wanting to hurt her, because giving her the truth means cutting off their connection. It really is so tragic. And I think Sol is still one of my favorite characters from all of this.
I love the way this was done.
Me too. And it just, and the fact that we feel bad, we feel sad about everything being pinned on him, despite all of these other things that he is guilty for, I think speaks to all of that complexity and nuance that the story has given us, and the way that Lee Jung-jae was able to portray this character.
He's super guilty. He's super sad. He's super kind. He's all these things. And I think Vernestra does summarize it at the end when she is describing Sol to May. I think it's sort of like she's giving a half truth, but I think the explanation that she gives of Sol is pretty accurate, and that he was sort of blinded by his love of Osha. It's all true.
It's so sad. I found myself, I kept thinking about the first time we see them together in episode 1 or 2, whenever it happens, when they're on the cliff. And that, remember the look on his face of just, oh, Osha, I believe you.
Yeah.
And she was like so relieved to see him. It's so angsty, which
It really is.
our favorite, but man, it hurts so good.
Star Wars is tragedy.
Star Wars is tragedy. All right, let's talk about the cool thing, though, that happened here, which is the bleeding of the kyber crystal.
Oh God, it's so cool.
Oh my God. I'm so obsessed. When May threw the lightsaber, which we didn't really talk about this, but or just to speak on it a little bit more, when May has the opportunity to kill Sol and she doesn't, and she throws the lightsaber, we get the shot of the kyber crystal, which the kyber crystal is what powers the lightsaber. And it's a very personal thing for a Jedi to make their lightsaber and to they got to find the kyber crystal that speaks to them. It's a whole thing. So to see it crack like that is very sad, because I think in a lot of ways there's kind of an anthropomorphization of the lightsaber kyber crystal sometimes, that it has a soul. The fact that it can be changed from blue to red, like we see Osha do, I think kind of speaks to the soul of the kyber, honestly. But I really love that May, again, she was able to let go of all of this. The thing that she's always wanted out of at the end is truth and justice, which is a very Jedi thing. That feels like a very Jedi sentiment of the truth and justice, and how she refuses to kill Sol in this moment was also kind of her Luke Skywalker moment, in the way that Luke Skywalker throws his lightsaber away and doesn't kill Vader.
Absolutely.
But Osha coming back and the fact that all of this happens with Sol's lightsaber is just so deliciously angsty.
Yes.
I keep using the word delicious in our Acolyte discussions because that's what this show is to me. It's delicious. And seeing, and people have pointed out that when she grabs the lightsaber and the crystal starts to bleed, you can see the dark power coming from her veins in her hands into the crystal.
It is so cool.
And to see it happen once she ignites, and for it to turn from blue to red as she ignites it, pointing it towards Qimir. Oh, like top 10 moment, I think, for me in the show.
And the concept of bleeding a crystal, I think, is relatively new to canon. I believe it was introduced in the Ahsoka novel by E.K. Johnson. Am I right about that?
I think it was.
Yeah. And basically, you need a tragic moment in order to change the relationship from the crystal and to bleed it from light to dark. And this was obviously the tragic moment for Osha. She really gives herself into killing Sol here, and it bleeds the crystal. And I think in this moment also, when Sol dies, so does the dream that she ever had of being a Jedi, and instead she becomes something else. And again, it is presented in this way that it sort of represents freedom in this show through this lens. And just to go back to the first time we heard the stranger speak, he says the Acolyte kills the dream. This is the moment in which Osha kills the dream. She is the Acolyte, and the dream is the Jedi on a high pedestal. And their purity, their selflessness, it's over. That was, the glass has been shattered for Osha, and she has made a choice.
Yeah, and I think for the rest of the episode, we really see Osha kind of overcome by these emotions of, Qimir in the Phantom Lair. He talks about anger, loss, fear, and desire. And we see Osha cycle through all of these emotions, especially in the back half of this episode. The anger in the fight against May, the fear and the loss when it comes to what happens with Sol, and then the sacrifice of May as well. And then the desire at the end of her making her own choice, of it being to go with Qimir. All of these are now things she is fully feeling. And the fact that we see her kind of break down about 3 times in this episode, I think really speaks to that, and of her really starting to allow these emotions to come to the surface.
Yeah.
The next little scene we have, which we've already kind of touched on, is Vernestra sensing Qimir and Qimir sensing Vernestra. And she says, you're alive. And we see Qimir scared, which is kind of crazy. The way
I
he
loved
puts
that
back,
though.
Yeah, the way he puts back on the helmet so quickly the second Vernestra gets off the ship. I think this, of course, is clear that Vernestra is the one that gave that scar to Qimir. There's a lot there. We see him watching her, and then he disappears. And yeah, there's a story there that I would very much like to know.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So when May and Osha escape, it's fun that May shows them how to escape because that's how she says that she got sucked into a tube. And I think this is a funny Luke Skywalker connection. You just did the Luke Skywalker connection of like throwing away the lightsaber. She was also sucked into the tube. And I think this entire like rekindling at the Tree of Life, I feel like we could have had an inkling that this would happen. That this return to this special place that was just their own. How tragic it was that May went to go look for Osha all those years ago and waited. This is their Frozen moment. The Frozen meets Kill Bill. I was watching it like, this is Frozen. This hug, the sobbing between them is Anna and Elsa. And we have arrived. Them saying the rhyme to each other too, I think was so sweet. And the like, who even came up with the rhyme? And they both don't really know, which is, I think, sort of mysterious. I hope that they kind of dig into that a little bit more. I think that was just a sweet moment, and then it becomes obviously it becomes more tragic when May can't remember it anymore. But it would be interesting if that rhyme had a deeper meaning later in the future when we uncover more about their origins. It's interesting because by the end of it, I feel like the show was less interested in their origins and more interested in their emotions and their motivations and their own choices. This concept of the fact that they actually are two people, not one, I think we didn't spend enough time on discussing, because Soul saying that you guys are actually the same, it's like, no, they're not. They're really not. They're, if they were created as the same because they're identical somehow as like clones, it kind of goes back to what we've talked about for years when it comes to the concept of the clones, is that they're all individual people. And if Osha and May are somehow relative to that in some sort, it still means that they can make their own choices. They have their own wants and desires. Just because they are the same, somehow created from the Force, doesn't mean that they're actually the same. And the show proves that. And the fact that Qimir reinforces that May reinforces that. Finally, when May asks, "What do you want, Osha?" God, that's satisfying. For me, that was really satisfying. And it was such a moment that she chooses to go with Qimir. There's seduction, but there's no manipulation. It's like what Leslie Headland has been saying in all of these interviews. Qimir doesn't manipulate her to the dark side.
Talk to her.
Exactly.
Once they get on brenock, he doesn't really talk to her.
I know. And we didn't even talk about the fact that he puts his hand on her shoulder after she goes through that traumatic event. She kind of brushes it off, but at the same time,
she brushes it off. That's when she ignites her lightsaber.
Exactly. I was just being kind. Okay. The fact that she wasn't there for that, but I think he recognizes that Soul meant so much to her, and this is a huge deal that this just happened, and he's there to comfort her.
Well, it does make you think about when, if this was his original lightsaber, when the moment that his lightsaber bled as well, and what would have been the circumstances surrounding that. So now just like Osha is carrying with her Soul's lightsaber, it's just,
it's so good.
I can't get over it. I'm so obsessed.
And then when they shake hands, when they make this deal, when Qimir and Osha make this their own deal about training together, it's a handshake through the lightsaber. Hands are a language, baby. And man, were they a language in this episode. Oh my God. I thought that was so cool though. I love this like handhold through the lightsaber.
The fact that it can't be a normal handshake. It's like through the lightsaber, and then very clearly like, I'm going to put my thumb on top of your thumb and give it a little gentle caress. It's just like, Qimir, my guy.
Intimate.
He was doing the seducing a couple weeks ago, but I think he found himself seduced and he doesn't really even realize how
Totally.
down bad he is.
Totally.
Uh, yeah, I think that this whole I cried in this scene when May's memory is wiped, and I thought they have this line too. I was surprising to me that Osha was like her first response is, "Well, we'll tell the Jedi what Soul did," and this is the one time that Qimir kind of gets close to losing it. He's like, "What do you mean? After all of this, you're still gonna trust the Jedi? That's quite literally ridiculous." And he says, "Osha, when they find out how powerful you are," and May says, "you will meet the same fate as our mother." And there's still this question hanging out there for me of if they are the same in the Force, but Osha is clearly the more powerful one. This is what everyone is attracted to, is sensing in the Force, is Osha's power, not May and Osha having the same power. It's just Osha. So I think this would also be a place for the next season to kind of explore, which I think they will. And I think that this is also part of Kymir's reactions to the things that are happening to Osha throughout this episode too, is I think he's realizing that she is a lot more powerful than he kind of ever could have imagined, and the ways that she is in fact quite different from May, which is what you were saying earlier too, of how they are different people, and Soul could sit there all day saying they're the same, but they're not. And there's so much more to them than their symbionts.
Yeah. How do we feel about the memory wipe?
I was so surprised. I kind of would never have thought there would be a memory wipe. I had actually put a small speculation on our TikTok a couple of days ago about May not making it out of the episode, and that it would be associated with the choice between May and Osha of what they would do next. And that kind of ended up being true. Just totally in a way I didn't sense it. And I think there is some irony to be explored in a future season of the stranger of Qimir kind of talking about this memory wipe, fearful of it from the Jedi, but then he's the one that's actually able to do this really big thing of removing Osha and himself from May's memory. And at first I was like, wow, we've got an amnesia plot in Star Wars. It's kind of crazy. But the more I sit with it, the more I really like it, and the more I think it will be. We've got the next mystery for season 2, but it's May's mystery now.
Yes, I love it too. And I think I was also surprised. I think it's also interesting that Qimir, one of his first lines when he's sort of infiltrated by the Jedi, when he's in the apothecary and he's posing as the apothecary, is don't do that, Jedi. What does he say? The mind wipe thing?
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me now looking back. And I feel like, amnesia plot is so tropey.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's tragic here. I think it flips things on its head again. I think there's a discovery that needs to happen now. The fact that she's not like, all her memories aren't erased, not all of them. Everything that involves Qimir and Osha are erased, but there's room to explore. It's exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. The next scene that we get is kind of our last little bit with May and Vernestra on Coruscant. And we kind of see the full extent of May's memory loss. And this really just kind of solidifies how much more tragic it even is that her last memories are basically from when she was 8 years old, from the fire on Brenock. And I just think it's so sad, and this sacrifice that May gave for Osha, it really is beautiful, because May is the one who also makes the choice to have her memory wiped. When Qimir first suggests it, Osha doesn't respond, but May's first response is, yeah, do it. And then she's the one that gives Qimir the go ahead. And I don't know, just this whole thing of seeing how different May is in this scenario now, and now she is with the Jedi, this total eclipse, this full reversal of May and Osha. It was so perfect. And I I think worked so well for this show of, the mystery. The show kicked off with the mystery of May being this Padawan, right? That we all kind of assumed they kind of marketed it as her being the Padawan who had gone rogue with the Jedi. And then but now she's working for the dark side. We find out that, there's the twins, and it was actually the other one that was with the Jedi, and May was with the dark sider. And now they've completely switched. And now we get to see Vernestra. She gives this speech about that we referenced a little earlier about Soul saying he was a kind, compassionate, gentle man, and he did a terrible thing. And then we see her talking to the Senate saying a rogue Jedi named Soul killed his accomplices to cover the story after she talks about the events on Brenock, which that was a dull knife to the heart. I think for me personally, but I think that the big takeaway from this scene is about Vernestra covering up what happened with the Senate, which is what we've been speculating this whole season, is that wherever things end, the Jedi were going to twist the story and they were going to conceal large portions of the story, which is what they did. And then we now have Vernestra and May working together to find this pupil of Vernestra's, i.e. Qimir.
So exciting. Okay, so I think it's really interesting that May says that she remembers fire. It's the first thing she says. And obviously she doesn't remember the details, but it really brought me back to that scene with Soul and the younglings in the very beginning of the season with that one Padawan who sees fire as like a representation of the Force. And I think it's just interesting that in any case that they do show May and Osha as opposites, as the same two sides of the same coin type situation, with the fact that now at the very end of it, and we'll get there, I do think that before we talk about the ending shot of Qimir and Osha together, we should talk about Vernestra and then come back to the ending shot, because I feel like we have a lot to say about that. But Osha standing by the ocean, right? The water. So we have May's last memory being fire, and now Osha's, or last shot with her, is ocean. And as many times as we can, it's just this dichotomy, this opposite, this yin and yang. And it's all based off of personal choice. So interesting, it's just great.
I think that it's so ironic that the tragedy of May and Osha was predicated on this lie told by the Jedi, by Indara and Soul and the Jedi. And now we have this new cycle of another lie starting from Vernestra and the Jedi again. And now it is with May. And it just, like I keep saying, it's delicious, it's ironic, it's angsty, it's tragic, and I love it. I do like how Vernestra uses the word twisted when she talks about Soul to the rest of the Senate, or to the representatives from the Senate, which is the same word that Soul used to talk about Qimir.
And the same word that Obi-Wan Kenobi uses to describe Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Before he became twisted and evil.
Exactly. And I think you could argue that Qimir is the least twisted person in this, comparatively.
From what we know.
Exactly. From how he's presented thus far. But I'm kind of going to say that he is the least twisted, because that's what he says. I've accepted my darkness. What have you done? What have you done with yours? And Soul has been twisted by his own guilt, by his regret, and by all the lies that caught up with him. And he wasn't able to see the way out. He was turned around. He was twisted. And Vernestra, I think, will perhaps could encounter a similar fate once things start to catch up with her as well, regarding Qimir, regarding the events on Brenock, regarding Soul. And I think that, as we're closing out May's story here, there is that horrible irony that May could actually be the one to clear Soul's name as she starts to unlock the truth about herself, realizes that the Jedi are lying once again. And as we've discussed, for May, she just wants the truth out there. She wants justice to the people who deserve it. And she wants people to know, to clear her own name. But in doing so, now Soul has been wrapped up in this. And that's not actually what happened. Soul is guilty, and Soul has things to be guilty for. But I think that she will also be a part of clearing his name from what it should be cleared from. Not all of it, obviously, the parts he actually did do. But, that he killed all the other Jedi is just a bold-faced lie.
Yeah. I feel like, okay, so like I said, before we talk about Osha and Qimir, I think we need to talk about Vernestra briefing Yoda. We got Yoda. Yoda's in this. It's funny how Leslie lied about Yoda being in the show. And I guess he's like really not in the show, but I think it is important to again establish the timeline that Yoda is a part of this. I've seen a lot of people who are like super big High Republic fans talk about how like every time Yoda shows up, he shows up a little too late. He's just showing up to clean up. And I think this it really is so classic. And I think this is one of those moments.
Yeah.
But it was pretty epic. I liked it. I liked the reveal.
Yeah, I did too. It was, and it's curious too if these are now two different people, the people that she's talking to in bigger positions of power. So Yoda at the end, and then whoever she was talking to on the comm link earlier in the episode, which I don't think was Yoda.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting way to end the series. I will note, I told you this before. It was the first thing my mom texted me. And to me, my sticking point about this episode was the whole standoff, the fact that Soul dies and everything. And instead, my mom was like, that was so good. Oh my God, Yoda. And I think, I don't know. I just thought that was noted. No, I should note that even though that wasn't the thing that I was the most excited about, it was clear that people were. So
It's funny.
Anyway. Okay. The ending shot with Qimir and Osha holding hands. Holding hands.
Mm-hmm. The ship has sailed. It's sailing so far.
The ship is an ocean liner.
Is it the Titanic? No. It is.
No.
Yeah, it's like a really, really big cruise ship. The biggest cruise ship.
I feel like the way this is set up is so epic. The music with the strings kicking in, it was just setting up another adventure. The hands linking them, the lightsaber.
The thumb.
Oh my God, the thumb again. The intimacy. The way the last shot. I mean, I've seen people compare the whole back facing the sunset situation to Rey at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, but I think you can even there's so many ways this is like a classic Star Wars ending, right? From Empire Strikes Back, of people looking off into the horizon, to Anakin and Padme getting married, all these things, right? I feel like it's very much a classic Star Wars ending. And there's always a sense of hope there, but then also a sense of melancholy. And oh my God, I can't wait to see what happens next, because there's some trepidation there as well. I think you can say that with Anakin and Padme. I think you could say that with Luke and Leia in Empire Strikes Back. I think you can even say that about The Rise of Skywalker too, Rey on Tatooine. And so our heroes, our main characters with their backs turned, so Star Wars, so exciting, hand holding.
More hand holding. It's so great.
We love to say on Sky Talkers, hands are a language, and it's almost like Leslie listens to the show. She probably doesn't, but the hands mean everything. This is an ultimate sign of intimacy. This is the ultimate sign of, oh my God, I can't.
It's the way we talked about Qimir having that Mr. Darcy effect in episode 6 with his white, billowy Regency era shirt. And the other thing that Pride and Prejudice is so well known for is understanding the importance of hands in that wonderful scene that is referenced all the time online of when Elizabeth touches Darcy's hand to get out of the carriage, and he like clenches his hand. And after she leaves, and it's this indication that he is feeling he's feeling things. And the fact that we get so many close-ups, there's so many notable moments in episode 6 and in episode 8 of Qimir reaching out to Osha specifically with his hands. Like I said, for me, the whole setup and how he is initiating the physical contact with her predominantly through his hands really just indicates to me that this is going to be an instance of him falling first and falling harder in our romantic tropes. And I really do kind of think that Osha could be his undoing at some point, because I think that the way I kind of read it is that he is all in on this with her specifically. I think even in a romantic sense. I don't know if Osha is quite there yet romantically. But for me, I read it as he's so there.
Totally.
And I love his little number one, he was like, I gotta get out of this ugly poncho and make sure it's just my sexy black outfit. Lots of arms.
So much arm.
So much arm again. He doesn't have the helmet. He stands next to her and then he shuffles closer. There's a pause and then a shuffle. And it is just
it's iconic.
So good. And that interview quote we referenced earlier of, there is like is Plagueis still in the cave watching them. There is a little bit of foreshadowing, a little bit of doom perhaps over their relationship at this point. But like Leslie said, some people could read it as a wedding. And
a marriage.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm in both camps.
Well, that's the Anakin and Padme parallel, right?
Yeah. I mean, her hood is like a veil.
It's I know.
I know. So,
do you think that their archetype is Hades and Persephone-esque?
I think a little bit. Yeah. I think I think our friend Alex had likened from another podcast, Lipsticks and Lightsabers, had likened her eating the soup to eating the pomegranate seeds.
I know.
For the Hades and Persephone myth, which I think is apt. And I think that the Hades and Persephone goes along well with even the Phantom of the Opera visual language, which is very reminiscent here on this unknown planet and in his little cave lair as well.
Do you want to give a brief summary of Hades and Persephone and that myth for people who are unaware?
Yeah, so the Hades and Persephone myth, it is a Greek mythology myth, and basically Hades is god of the underworld, and Persephone, her mother is Demeter, who is the goddess of harvest and like springtime and all things alive that grow. So then, and Persephone is the daughter of that. So then Hades being the god of the underworld and death, they're these opposites, right? And Hades basically falls in love with Persephone, takes her down to the underworld, and Demeter is beside herself and basically gets into basically stops the world from growing anything. She is so distressed at the loss of her daughter. And Hades, forgive me in some of these details, but Hades says he'll release her, but then Persephone eats the pomegranates of the underworld. And that means that she can never permanently leave the underworld. And it is also symbolic of her union with Hades. And so it's a myth about the seasons because Hades does allow Persephone to leave the underworld, but only for half of the year. And
for springtime.
Yeah, for springtime. And then when she goes back down, that is when Demeter, her mother, is in mourning. And it is wintertime and everything has died above ground. But the Hades and Persephone myth, it falls really nicely into the tradition of like monster romances, of enemies to lovers, because the idea is that Hades and Persephone are married and they are lovers, despite them being these representatives of light side and dark side, of springtime, of life and death, really in kind of the purest form, I would say. And so when we have these stories of light side and dark side, these kind of monster romances, often it's the maiden who is descending into the darkness to meet the monster, the villain, someone like Qimir, which is kind of what we touched on with Osha being here on this planet, this dark side planet in the cave, with the Phantom of the Opera, with Qimir, with all of that, all of this visual language. You can trace a lot of it back to Hades and Persephone, and it's a very popular like storytelling structure.
I think the moment she eats the soup, we should have brought this up. I was thinking about it, and it just didn't fit into our plan. Her eating within the cave, the underworld, which we identified as the underworld, is so symbolic, I think, and reminiscent of Persephone eating the pomegranate, consuming parts of the underworld and being forever tied to it, and also being like part of two worlds, which I think that Osha is parts of two worlds, right? She experienced the Jedi and now she's experiencing the dark side. And I guess you could argue that chimeras in a similar route or a similar way, but we don't know that much yet about him and his past, but we could get there. But I do think there's a lot of parallels here. And again, I really do think we're going the route of romance. And it is so great.
Going the route
No, we're
of
in. We're in.
romance. We were there. Well, I have a quote from Manny Jacinto from a GQ interview that just came out yesterday. And he talks about the Oshmir of it all, which just feels so great. He said,
I know.
in the fan art I've seen, there's a good amount that implies something between Osha and the stranger. That's something that people, I think, have been yearning for in this genre, or at least in this IP. And I love that people are honing in on it and encouraging it. So I think people can look forward to more of that, possibly. If people want it, we can explore that in a subsequent season. The people are here to say we want it.
Manny, people want it.
Manny, they want it. And this is, I think it's important him saying that people are yearning for this in this genre and specifically in this IP, because Star Wars is not a romance story. It is a space opera. It is galactic. It is familial. It is dramatic. But romance is usually never the story number one, I would say, in nearly all Star Wars stories. And it isn't even in The Acolyte. But to see it be brought more to the forefront in this enemies to lovers, way more honestly than Reylo was in a lot of ways, is exciting to think that they could continue to push that and really see what this kind of story could be realized as in Star Wars, as the first priority, perhaps.
Exciting.
It's
so great.
It's so exciting. So exciting. I think that there's so much potential for season 2 and for these characters and just for exploring the dark side in a new way. And I really, really hope we get that.
Since we're nearing the end of our conversation here about the finale, are there any lingering thoughts or anything that you want to discuss before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. I think it's clear that part of Osha's motivation in a subsequent season would be finding out how to basically do the next level of Chimir's power to wipe memory, but to restore memory. And that this could be a great nuanced discussion about the ability to give life, to create life, in the sense that she's restoring her sister's life to her as she kind of lives in this limbo without her memories. I think that feels right up Leslie's alley, honestly, and a great way to kind of talk about the creation of life and their power and how that could tie into something like what Plagueis is doing.
Totally. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's such a astute observation. It also goes into what we were just talking about Hades and Persephone. When Persephone returns to the above ground, it's for springtime. It's so things can grow, so that new life can begin. And that's what you're describing should Osha reunite with May.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it'll bring us back to our question too of, can they ever remain on the same path? And what does that look like for them?
Well, I think this show really underscored that you can think based off of their mysterious birth that they're the same person, but no, they're not. The importance of making your own choices has never been more underscored than in this show.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't think they can remain on the same path.
I don't think so either. And then the next season could presumably be us seeing the return of May's memories, perhaps, depending on if we got another season or, 2 more seasons. But eventually May will then have to make her choice about what she wants in her life too. And she did make a choice, right? She had that agency at the end to be the sacrifice for her sister in this moment. But hopefully when the tides have turned again, when they have eclipsed each other once again, what will her choice be then?
Yeah, like, would she choose the Jedi? I feel like yes. Or the light side?
She could.
Something?
It's interesting to think about, because if May is someone who we've seen in the back half be so obsessed with justice and truth that are very Jedi qualities, that through her journey with Vernestra of seeing the corruption, the twisting of the Jedi narrative that's happening from within the Jedi, could she say to herself, I want this to be different. I want to be in here and help be responsible for the Jedi turning the ship around, for not hiding things anymore. being a truthful liaison between the Senate and the Jedi. I don't know. I think there's a lot of possibility, and the irony is absolutely there for her.
Also, I mean, if that does become her path, the next irony is that that actually can't be her path because the truth can't come out based off of what we know about Star Wars canon.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that May doesn't survive?
Well, I think
I don't know.
I hear what you're saying. I think there's still enough time in the timeline that it
I do
could come
agree.
out and then be forgotten again. That
Yeah.
basically May's efforts will be fruitless in one way or another on that front. It's just, I guess, how it happens.
And like her pursuit of it for her, I guess, own moral gain. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I feel like this conversation kind of brings me back to some of those theories that we referenced last episode about whether or not Osha and May can actually live together in this galaxy. Like, does one have to die? Or do they need to like somehow force combine? I don't know how they would ever do that, but maybe that's what we're going towards when we talk about the switching, because I don't know if it would be super satisfying for there to be 4 seasons of the Acolyte and each season ends with like a different switcheroo.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Osha will stay on this path for a while until she creates a new it wouldn't be about her switching to the light side again. It would be about her creating a new path. But then May is still a question mark. I don't think they would ever combine at this point because I think that is part of what Leslie is trying to say, and what you were bringing up too with the individuality of them, that Soul keeps trying to justify his actions by the fact that they are the same person, but they're actually not. They may have started out that way, but they're not the same person, and they have been together or apart too long that they could never even probably do that, even if they wanted to. And the whole thing with Qimir that Leslie talks about is that he's never mixed them up. He knows who they are individually. And yeah.
Great show. 10 out of 10.
I'm so sad that next week we won't have the Acolyte.
I know. That's why we got to talk about it. So don't forget, send us your questions, call us up, leave a voicemail, 774-343-1138. Don't forget it. Add it to your contacts. Sky Talkers voicemail.
774-343-1138.
1138.
Give us a call. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to our Acolyte coverage. We will, as noted, have one more week covering the Acolyte, and we would love to hear your questions. So please, it's a new thing for us. So we'll see how it goes. So please give us some good questions to talk about, or tidbits we've missed, or things we need to talk about a little bit more. We would love to hear it. Until then, though, you can find us on Twitter, X at SkyTalkersPod, or our personal handles. Charlotte's is at Clarity, and mine is at Caitlin Plusher. We also have our TikTok, our Instagram, our website, skytalkers.com. These are all good places to find us. You can also email us as well, hello@skytalkers.com. And if you have a couple of seconds and would like to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we would really appreciate that, as it helps other people find our show. And if you're interested in other ways to support us, you can head on over to our Patreon and check out our reward tiers there.
I want to say a huge thank you to these patrons: Arazu, BJ, Blast Points, Talia, Talking Bay 94, Kat, Alex, Rachel, Stephanie, Tim, Eunice, Hunter, Josh, Tegan, Matt, Brad, Emma, Jeff, Jose, Justin, Kate, Maggie, James, Koval, Danny, BB, Nate, Madison, Aubrey, and Ian. Thank you so much for supporting us.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And until next time, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.